Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for our Local History Spotlight. I am Nicole Adams, the Local History and Genealogy Librarian for the Oshawa Public Libraries, and we are excited to have Lisa Terich here from the Oshawa Museum as our featured speaker about Oshawa's theatrical history. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to recognize that we are situated on traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, governed by the Williams Treaties. We are grateful to work and learn on these lands, and we are mindful of this treaty relationship with the Mississaugas of Scugog Island and the greater Anishinaabeg Nation of which they form a part, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people. So many longtime Oshawa residents will know that Oshawa was home to many downtown theaters in its past, where people enjoyed plays, concerts, musical theater, and movies. So Lisa's going to take us on a journey through the history of Oshawa's theatrics.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole, for that introduction. Thank you all so much for spending your Thursday night with us. As Nicole said in the introduction, my name is Lisa Terich. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Oshawa Museum. And just in case you weren't aware, which if you're not, that is more than okay. I hear that quite frequently. The Oshawa Museum is located down in Oshawa's Lakeview Park. We're comprised of Henry House, Guy House, and Robinson House. And we are mandated with sharing the history of our community from the earliest Indigenous inhabitants all the way to present day. So in 2011, the Oshawa Museum hosted a traveling exhibition, as we frequently do, and this one came from the Peterborough Museum and Archives called Voices of the Town, Vaudeville in Canada. As we always do with our traveling exhibitions, we always complement them with local information, images, and artifacts, essentially bringing in that Oshawa perspective, which is what we're going to be sharing today, Oshawa's theatrical history. This image is from the Thomas Bulkley collection of photographs held at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. It was taken at the Crystal Theatre in 1912. This was the King Street Methodist group that presented a play called Ladies' Aid in 1862. It was located at 15 Simcoe Street South, which later became part of Kresge's. So originally called the Wilson Block, this building once extended from the corner of Simcoe Street East to the present location of the Gift House. The bricks of this whole block of buildings were made of clay dug from Captain John Wilson's property, located just east of Wilson Road, hence why it was called Wilson Road. Captain John Wilson had the clay dug and fired the molten bricks in a kiln on his property. These bricks were brought by horse and cart to this site in downtown. Captain Wilson owned this property at the Four Corners, and he used these bricks to construct this building, much of which is still standing, although somewhat altered through the years. A portion of the structure was removed in the late 1970s to make way for construction of the new Canada Trust building, while other alterations have been inflicted upon the facades of Lovell Drugs, the Gift House, and other nearby stores. The portion of the original block from Lovell Drugs east to Gift House was purchased from Mr. Wilson by Mr. J.W. Borsberry in the late 1800s. This site had a theater building in it, which later became known as the Borsberry Music Hall. There were no floors on the second level, which permitted a large open area for a theater. After the purchase, Mr. Borsberry remodeled the music hall, installing new opera chairs in place of old benches, and upgrading the adjoining dining hall and dressing rooms. The music hall could seat 700 and showcased both professional and local talent, including the Marx Brothers of Canada. And you're going to be hearing a lot about these Marx Brothers. Don't be expecting any Harpos or Grouchos or what have you. I'll chat about them in a little bit. Ownership of the music hall transferred from Mr. Wilcox, transferred to Mr. Wilcox, and he changed the name to Wilcox's Grand Theatre. From that time on, only movies were shown, so they moved from the live theater to movies. The theater was also altered inside to accommodate offices and apartments. The Grand Restaurant was located on the second floor, and it was well patronized and operated for a number of years. The Lovell family purchased the property, installing a second floor for offices and utilizing the third floor for apartments. Today, Lovell Drugs remains at the street level, while the upper floors were used for some time as offices. And then in the late 2010s, the upper floors of this historical downtown building were renovated into high-end apartments. This image was taken at the corner of King and Salina Streets around 1910. And again, this is another image from the Thomas Folkley collection at the RMG. The camera was located at Salina Street facing west. And if you take a look, you can see the Opera House. So if you look, you can see the sign which has got a star, and that was the Opera House entrance. And you can also see on the other side of the road, the Oshawa Electric Company sign. The Opera House is where the Borsberry Music Hall was located. Just such a great image. Now, this one isn't necessarily historical. This might be a site which is familiar with those who are familiar with the downtown. In the 1990s, murals became more and more plentiful around downtown Oshawa, and this mural was by Brian Romagnoli of Beamsville, Ontario, and it highlights the history of Borsberry and other aspects of theatrical history. And this, of course, is located on the northwest corner of Salina Street and Athol Street. And then just for a little bit more of a close-up view, take a closer look, and you can see the names of the Marx on the scroll. And like I said, we're going to be chatting about the Marx Brothers a little later on in this presentation. So this presentation is going to include lots of historical images, but also images and advertisements from newspapers. The building which housed the music hall later became the Grand Theatre and Cafe. The theatre was discontinued in later years, and as I mentioned, Lovell purchased the property. And these particular ads for the Grand Theatre were from the Ontario Reformer in 1922. So Oshawa was entertained by touring companies presenting plays and operas, by lecture tours and concerts. Recitations were a very big thing then, and smokers, which were variety shows for men only. The Marx Brothers were always booked for at least 2 weeks. They would present a different play each night. On arrival in Oshawa, they always created a stir at the Four Corners where they would set up a little stage in the mud or the dust, according to the season. A few of the musicians in the company would strike up a lively tune, and then Ernie or Joe would spiel the coming attractions and added entertainments to the passerby, men on their way to the McLaughlin Carriage Works or the Peddler People Factory. Both were located fairly nearby. And of course to the women who were in the downtown doing their daily shopping. The actors would stay at Finnegan's Hotel, which later became the American Hotel, which you can see in this image. It was located on the corner of Salina and King Streets. Admission to the music hall cost 10, 20, or 30 cents, and all of the best people would be in attendance. Ladies wearing their lace-trimmed bodices, gloves, and jewelry, and gentlemen in top hats puffing on their cigars. Perhaps the Marx Brothers contributed more to the cultural entertainment of Ontario at the turn of the century than any other performers. All but one of the 7 brothers was in show business, started by Robert, who was the eldest, and a patent medicine man. Tom, the shoemaker and comedian, joined him at one time. There were 7 companies on the road. Audiences knew every line of their favorite plays, such as Under Two Flags, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Jane Eyre, The Bell Ringers. When the actors would dry up, as they sometimes did, the prompts would actually come from the floor. Ernie Marx was great at this, and he always sailed through his parts with plenty of asides and thanked the audience for its attention when he forgot the words and a prompt came from the back row. And this, I don't unfortunately know which newspaper this was clipped from, but this is from a local Oshawa newspaper asking its readers if they remember the Oshawa production of HMS Pinafore, which came to our town in 1912. And some listening to this talk tonight might have memories of the Marx Theatre. The Marx Theatre once stood on the corner of King and Selina Streets in downtown Oshawa. That hotel, which was pictured a few slides back, that was the American Hotel. This building was constructed around 1875, and the proprietor of the hotel was Mike Finnegan. He fought in the American Civil War. He was paid by a wealthy American family to impersonate their son so that he could escape from the draft. After the war, he returned to Oshawa, married a woman from Pickering, and he built the American Hotel. By 1921, Mike Finnegan had retired according to the directory from that year. The building was sold to Mr. Martin, who changed the hotel into a theater and named it the Paragon Theater. And this is an image of the amateur theatrical in Martin's Theater in 1915. So not long after changing it from the Paragon, he called it the Martin or the New Martin Theater. Martin's Theater was the location for this play, Willowdale, by the King Street Methodist Ladies' Aid in 1915. A repeat performance raised $800 for the D Company of the 116th Battalion, because of course this is taking place in 1915 and World War I was well on its way over in Europe. By 1924, we see that name change to the New Martin Theater, and the proprietor this time was Ernie Marx. Ernie was the youngest of the Marx siblings. He joined his theatrical brothers, Joe and Alex, when he was 19 years of age. On August 7th, 1901, he married his wife, Catherine Reynolds of Brockville. Ernie and Kitty joined Joe Marx Company and toured with them through the United States until late March 1902. Ernie had gained a reputation as a first-class comedian, and his wife, Kitty, for her singing and her dancing. Ernie began playing in Oshawa in October of 1905. Quote, Ernie Marx is without a doubt the best Marx Brothers company that has visited Oshawa, end quote. Kitty Reynolds toured as the leading lady in her husband's Ernie's stock company. A talented singer and comedian, she was in her own right. Kitty and Ernie closed their company around 1922, and they moved to Oshawa when they bought the old movie house, the Martin Theatre. And here are just a few examples of some advertisements, which again came from the Ontario Reformer in 1922. In 1928, the New Martin Theatre underwent both interior and exterior renovations. The Daily Times noted on March 10, 1928 that, quote, Ernie Marx, manager of the New Martin Theatre, is transforming his theatre into one of the most up-to-date motion picture houses in the province. Not only was it outfitted with new seats and lighting, it was also equipped with a cooling and ventilating system. Unfortunately, I do not have the date for this particular ad noted, but if one was to perhaps take a note of the titles being shown, we could perhaps date it afterwards. So Ernie Marx went on to become one of the most popular mayors to ever hold the office here in Oshawa. I bet you didn't expect this talk on theaters to get a little political, but here we are. He remained active in Oshawa until his death in 1952. Kitty remained in Oshawa until her death in 1962. Sometime between 1931 and 1934, Ernie Marx changed the name to the Marx Theatre. It became a popular place for traveling vaudeville performers, theater, opera, and motion pictures. Since that time, the theater has passed through various hands, and by the 1980s, the new owners had made it into a popular hotspot for showing cult movies, such as the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It has also become a great place for previewing up-and-coming local rock bands. Between 1984 and 1988, The historic building managed to survive 2 major fires and fierce competitions from other theaters in the area. However, fast forward to April of 1992, when the Marx Brothers was torn down in order to make room for a parking lot. It was demolished by its owners, a Willowdale-based company, who had long-term plans to build a 3- or 4-story office building. Although, as I'm sure we all know, those plans never came to fruition, as the former location of the Marx is today a parking lot beside the restaurant Avanti's. Oh, and I should have noted that the image on the previous slide was from the Oshawa Library. Ernie and Kitty's son went on to become mayor of Oshawa in 1967 to 1968. He went to O'Neill CVI and then on to Osgoode Hall to become a lawyer. This was the first time a father and son had been the mayor of Oshawa, and I believe it's still the first and only time that we've seen a father-son mayor of our city. And this political tradition continues with the 2018 election of Bradley Marx as the city councillor for Ward 3. He is the great-grandson of Ernie Sr. and the grandson of Ernest. And the image of Bradley Marx was taken from the city's website, just so that I'm giving credit for the images. The Regent Theatre. The Regent Theatre opened its doors to the public on October 16, 1920. Owned and operated by the famous Players Canadian Corporation Limited, the Regent Theatre was the first theatre in Oshawa to offer perfect vision for all its patrons. When the Regent Theatre first opened on King Street, its front was modeled on Georgian architecture. The entrance lobby and promenade were finished in mahogany. The ladies' and gentlemen's restrooms opened off the promenade, which ran the entire width of the building. The promenade had a partition-topped Y-glass to guard theater-goers from drafts coming in through the main doors. Unfortunately, I don't know a date for this image, but I just love it. I think it's from sometime around the 1930s. And if you look very closely, to the left of the door, you can see that there's a couple tenants both to the left and the right, but the one to the left is a barber shop, and you can see the iconic barber pole just outside. Couple advertisements for different shows which are being shown at the Regent. The stage was 40 feet by 20 feet with heavy velvet curtains framing the moving screen. The stage was expandable, providing more space for performing troupes. Dressing rooms were also built into the theatre to accommodate performers. And the quote from the Oshawa Daily Reformer, which appears on the screen, reads, "The Regent Theatre in Oshawa stands as a living memorial to its community spirit and is one of the finest moving picture theatres in Canada." So the first manager of the Regent Theatre was a man named Leon Oisier. I'm really hoping I'm pronouncing that gentleman's name correctly, and my apologies if I have butchered it. These images show the annual Spring Fashion Review, which took place at the Regent. Approximately 9 of Oshawa's leading merchants will showcase their fashions in this sold-out show in 1928 for 3 consecutive nights. It's just amazing to me, the crowd which is out in front of the Regent, which you can see in this image. And if you are looking with keen eyes, you can see the rail tracks running down the middle of King Street as well. This is an image of the Regent from the 1940s. And if you look just past the Regent to the left, you can see the clock tower of what was the Oshawa Post Office, which was located at King and Ontario Streets. And these images were taken in 1947, and they are from the Archives of Ontario, Ontario Movie Theatres collection. And if any of you have been inside the Regent recently after the renovations, you can tell that a lot of the work that was done has been very faithful to how the theater looked many, many years ago. And for those with keen eyes, you can take a look at the bottom right image and see the car probably facing the right way on King Street for the time, but in today's mind, I'm looking at that car thinking, you're facing the wrong way. King Street is one way and you go the other way. But anyways, I digress. The Regent has experienced many changes since it first opened. During the 1960s, seating was cut down to 868 seats to make room for a concession counter and larger lobby. At this time, a new front and marquee was added. In 1989, however, it closed due to competition from the large theater complex which opened in Whitby. Various owners reopened the theater, but unfortunately, they did not have it open for a very long time. In 1997, the Regent reopened as a nightclub called the Adrenaline. This venture failed after the owners of Adrenaline were forced to adhere to severe liquor law restrictions. They were ordered to close for 90 days and unfortunately never reopened. In 1999, another attempt was made to reopen the Regent, this time going back to its roots as a live theater. A 5-year lease was signed by the Hourglass Theater Productions. The company was preparing to present the Rocky Horror Picture Show when a water pipe burst, spewing 20 feet of water into the theater. After this happened, the company was released from their lease. In March of 2000, talk began of tearing the Regent down. In May, a notice, the one that you see on the right in this slide, it was placed in the local paper by Heritage Oshawa, informing the citizens that the city of Oshawa intended to pursue the designation of the Regent as a property of architectural and historical value or interest. In the February 28, 2001 edition of the Oshawa This Week, it was reported that the city had bought the Regent for $700,000. Now, there was an attempt in the mid-2000s to open up the theater and have it back to its roots as, again, a live theater performance. And certainly it did, and it was successful for a few months, unfortunately having to close. But by September of 2010, the Regent Theatre reopened by at that time, it was the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. Today, it's Ontario Tech University, to be used as a large lecture theatre for students and for community and cultural events during the evenings and on weekends. And this is a quote coming from the university. Given the theatre's history, the role it has played in downtown Oshawa, and the special attachment to the community continues to have for the Regent, the University of Ontario Institute of Technology is proud to play a part in the restoration of the theatre, returning it to its former glory. And as you can see in this image, you can see the students with their laptops learning away, which I have to say, if anybody has seen anything at the Regent, be it bands performing, orchestras, they've had a Tupi and Bino kids show. They used to, pre-pandemic, do classic movies on the first Thursday of the month. And because of the way that they've got the student desks, like they come up, they swing up, you've got a lovely place to put your drink and your popcorn. Like they've done such a great job with the restoration. They've made it into just such a lovely community cultural space in the downtown. And if you haven't had a chance to go in, whether for doors open, whether for a performance, what have you, once it's safe to do so, find a reason to get to the Regent, because it's beautiful inside. The restoration has been great, and you're gonna enjoy whatever you see being presented on stage. Highly recommend, 10 out of 10. Another theater which was located in downtown Oshawa was the Plaza Theater. It was located where Riley's Pub is located today, beside the W.B. White Insurance. That is the building with the Art Deco windows beside the plaza. The plaza became the Highland Theater, which also unfortunately closed its doors in the 90s. It is believed to have been the last theater to remain open in downtown Oshawa from its time. The expanded and renovated movie theater at the Oshawa Centre unfortunately spelled an end for the theaters in the downtown. As a nod to the community's theatrical history, the different screens at the Famous Players were named for the various theaters of the past. So rather than just going to screen 1, 2, or 3, you might have been going to screen 2, which was called the Plaza. A nice little nod. And the Biltmore. It was located almost directly across the road from the Regent. It would eventually become the Odeon, and for some time it was a nightclub. And the nightclub, I can't even begin to tell you which name it was, because even the nightclub had changed its name many, many times through the years. Through the 2010s, it was operating as the Oshawa Music Hall. And in mid-2020, it was announced that the venue was going to be turning back into the Biltmore Theatre. As the new owner explained to the Durham Radio News, quote, "We will split the place into 2. One part is going to be the main floor, and the upper portion, which is the mezzanine or the balcony, will be called the Biltmore Lounge, which can be separated off for smaller events," end quote. They plan to strip down the outside of the building, painting it from the original color and recreating the original neon Biltmore sign out front, which you can see in the image there. And I thank Durham Radio News for keeping me up to date on the latest happenings of the Biltmore, because had I given this presentation back in April, like we had originally planned, I would have just stopped the history of the Biltmore right when I was calling it the Oshawa Movie Theatre and moved on to the next slide. So it's kind of interesting that it's going to be getting a new lease on life, again, returning to a venue like that. So we've talked a lot about the early theatrical roots of many of these theaters. But most of them ended up becoming movie theaters later in life. But let's talk a little bit about some of the live theater which you can still see in our community. The Oshawa Little Theatre owes its existence to a wonderful lady named Verna Conant. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a community or cultural or charitable organization in Oshawa which at some point wasn't given a little helping hand from Verna Conant. And I say that as an employee of the Oshawa Historical Society, and she was our first president. So Verna's got a very special place in our hearts down at the museum. In 1928, Verna had a vision to create a community theater and hired a professional director, John Craig, from Winnipeg to instruct local actors. Their first play was called The Private Secretary, and it played for 2 nights in October 18th and 19th, 1929. And this followed a few months later by Alice Sit by the Fire, both of which were directed by Mr. Craig. The shows were performed at the Collegiate Auditorium, and tickets were sold for $1 at either the Arcade or Mitchell's Drugstore. As a result of the Great Depression, however, the group could no longer afford to pay Mr. Craig's fees, and he left. But the group had sufficient expertise to continue productions for a few more years. Unfortunately, the Depression did hit the community, and the theater dissolved in 1932. Verna, however, never gave up the idea, and the group was restarted in 1950 with 2 productions at O'Neill Collegiate, Angel Street, Gaslight, and John Loves Mary. Both were directed by a woman named Sarah Quinn. It's hard to compare today's facilities to those used by the original Oshawa Little Theatre. Until 1956, members rehearsed in each other's homes and rented out church halls, and sets were built just about anywhere they could find space to build sets. Many times, the sets had to be carried down the street to the production venue, which was also rented. One of these venues was the old, unheated Rotary Hall, which, according to one of our Oshawa Historical Society members, was so cold and drafty that the actors had to huddle over heat vents while waiting their cues to go on stage during rehearsals. Dr. Glazier kindly offered the OLT space to build its sets in the coach house behind his offices on Simcoe Street. These were also unheated, and sometimes it was difficult to get the paint on the flats before they froze. In 1975, the problem of sets, props, and costumes was solved when a suitable space for a workshop and meeting place became available at a vacant factory previously owned by the Tripp Construction, located at 62 Russet Avenue. However, before they could occupy the building, The membership had to raise $171,000 to pay for repairs and refurbishments. $30,000 came from the theater's building fund, and Ontario agreed to give $57,000, providing that the membership could raise the rest. There was a huge fundraising campaign which started. Member support was incredible, with fundraising committee members donating an average of $555 each. Almost every member contributed something to the local effort. Frank Vory, owner of Owasco Volkswagen, donated a new Beetle, which was offered to the public. So you can see there really was a lot of community support for this community theater. In 1976, the renovated facility opened. It comprised the workshop and rehearsal rooms that are still in use today. The rehearsal room was equipped with theater lighting and a lighting booth, which was now part of the costume room, although it was not used as a real theater apart from a few performances during Oshawa's Fiesta Week in the late 70s and for some youth group productions. OLT continued to rent facilities for their space at O'Neill Collegiate, McLaughlin Auditorium, and Eastdale Collegiate. And the company through the years continued to thrive. In the early 80s, the membership decided to build their own theater and, once again, obtained a Ontario grant. This, together with some amazing contributions from businesses and individuals, set the wheels in motion to build today's 360-seat facility adjacent to the old rehearsal room and workshop. Architect Peter Smith, designer of the Shaw Festival Theatre, was hired, and in 1983, the new building at 62 Russet Avenue was formally opened with a gala performance of The Music Man. In approximately 7 years, the theatre was mortgage-free. OLT became one of the few theaters in the province to own its facility, which is still the case today. And on a personal note, for quite a number of years while my family lived in Oshawa, we attended St. Joseph's Catholic Church, which didn't have a home in the late 80s. And so we went to Mass, and they must have rented space at Oshawa Little Theatre because that's where we had our Mass services. So I remember being a little kid going to Mass, and every so often the backdrops were all different because, of course, the Little Theatre was staging all of these different performances and shows. So it was definitely an interesting way to experience a Catholic Mass. And of course, even more live theater, because the Oshawa Little Theatre isn't Oshawa's only place to see live theater today. Durham Shoestring Performers was founded in 1974 by Jeanine Butler, whose objectives are followed by her successors today, which are to present challenging and entertaining plays with an emphasis on innovative acting, writing, directing, and design, and to produce these plays keeping costs low so that live theater can be accessible to all members of the community. And that has actually come from the Durham Shoestring Performers website. The current artistic director is Carolyn Wilson, who took the reins in 1990. DSP has performed all seasons from the Arts Resource Center, which is behind City Hall. Because of the intimacy of the 105-seat Fishbowl, this venue affords a powerful theatrical experience for its audiences. The Oshawa Museum, or the Oshawa Historical Society, hosts monthly speaker series on the third Tuesday of the month. We do so at the Arts Resource Center. So there's usually about 2 or 3 times during our speaker series season that we are hosting these speakers, and again, behind us are these different theaters and these different sets, and it's always kind of fun because in January and March we walk in and we're like, okay, what are we walking into? What new environment are we going to be seeing inside the Arts Resource Center? And finally, the Mansfield family have made an impact for local theater. They formed Dance and Productions, a not-for-profit theater company, who are committed to staging high-caliber theater by producing classic and contemporary works that enrich, entertain, educate, and welcome diverse audiences. They also founded Silly Stages, presenting an annual pantomime production for families during the holiday season and other family-friendly shows throughout the year. In October 2018, the Mansfield Cabaret opened at 50 Bond Street, which is the former CAW Hall, with a 30-seat capacity, and in mid-2020, they announced they plan on moving to the downtown around the Four Corners. So there's still many opportunities in our community, not only to experience culture, but to experience live theater. And hopefully, once the pandemic and all the dust has settled, we'll be able to enjoy these venues and these spaces once again. So with that, I am going to say thank you so much for listening. I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing. And if there are any questions, I am going to do my very best to try and answer them.